Okay. It looks like we're all set for our... Is this our third episode? Or is it the fourth episode? We've done so many. I'm losing count.
Maybe fifth.
It's the fifth? Oh my god. Yeah. That has a good ring to it. Okay. Well, welcome. Welcome everybody to another installment of Grimdark Therapy. I'm joined by Maka of the Outer Circle and North of Northern Exile.
Hello.
Ahoy.
And for today, I have a particular topic in mind. And I think it might be the most controversial topic yet. And that topic is there a limit to your dudes? I suppose we should, for those who may not be familiar with the term, define what exactly that is. And I'll try to do that, and you guys can correct me if I'm missing any key components. But essentially, the your dudes concept, as it relates to tabletop wargaming, would be the idea that you buy your models, you put them together, you paint them the colors you want, you give them the lore you want, you build the custom characters you want, and put them together. Rule of cool, it's all kind of tied into that. Is that the gist of it, in your eyes? Somebody.
Mackie,
anybody.
Jump in.
Ah.
In what regard? What can I add to that?
No, I mean, am I missing anything in my description of, like, does that lay out what your dudes is?
Yeah, it's just that. It's your personal ownership over the identity of your chapter, faction, whatever it might be, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, how it
exists
within the universe.
Yeah.
There has to be a limit. Like, you can't... So I've been on this for a while, right? As somebody who writes and reads writing too, like, if you create something, like Games Workshop have created a setting. If we just take off the training wheels and we say, okay, Mackie, you can just create whatever you want, and that's completely canon, no problem. We're running into issues. It becomes a kaleidoscope of nonsense. It becomes then do need to be defined rules. But the fun for me of as somebody who writes 40k lore for fun is working out a way to write your Space Marine chapter, let's say, because that's what everyone does at one stage or another. Making sure they fit in with the tapestry of 40k. So you don't make them too Mary Sue, you don't make them lame, you make them just enough. They fit right into a certain demographic, right in 40k. Doing that is a lot more rewarding than just splurging out and saying, well, my guys are all women, or my guys are, all psychic blanks, when Space Marines can't be psychic blanks, right? That kind of a thing. So, for me, your ownership is limited, yeah. Like, your ownership of your dudes in a lore sense is definitely limited, and it should be. Because the fun of writing lore is working out how to be creative within the sandpit that 40k is. If there's no edge to the sandpit, it's just a load of sand. It's not a pit, it's not a defined thing that you can actually mold and do what you want with. So in terms of lore, because, I like my lore, that's definitely true. There should be limitations on what you can and can't do, in my opinion.
Yes, I share a lot of what you're laying out there. Like the sentiments are like really jiving with me based on what you described. The reason why real quick, Mako, sorry to interrupt, but the reason why I wanted to lay that out that way is because I find often, listening to different YouTubers or podcasts or just reading, threads or whatever on Reddit, like, you'll often see people kind of default to this your dudes as a license of just go nuts, go wild. It doesn't matter. Like, you could pick the least tasteful thing you can imagine, right? Take Tyranids and have them become possessed by chaos demons to make your own variant of whatever, right? And I had this gut intuition that it's like there has to be a limit of some kind, because like I come at it, like I often use like as a catch-all term like tasteful whenever it comes to home brewing or house ruling's a separate issue, but when it comes to like home brewing your lore for your custom chapter or custom faction or sub-faction, whatever, I think, and that's in keeping with what you laid out, North, right? Like it's all about like a tasteful presentation of something you've come up with and that you're contributing to the campaign or the tabletop, right?
I will always, I get really excited when I read lore, and I read a lot of lore because, you know, YouTube. Whenever I did this series, and I will be doing it again on your custom Space Marine chapters, and Xenos chapters, and Guard regiments, whatever, I always get really excited when I'm reading the first few paragraphs and I'm thinking, all right, this fits. This person's identified a gap in the lore that hasn't been filled, but it makes logical sense for it to be filled. And they're writing a chapter that fits in there. That's when I start going, ooh, this is great, right? The ones that make me roll my eyes and think this is going to be a long half hour of reading are the ones where, you know, they do something wacky in the first, you know. Again, the amount of times I've heard my chapter is really, really, really good friends with the Inquisition, which means we can do things that other chapters can't. It's like, dude, like, like if your chapter to be friends with the Inquisition, it takes thousands and thousands and thousands of years of, you know, almost constant being their lackeys before they even give you a smidge of responsibility, depending on who they are. But there are ways around that. There was somebody who wrote a cool story about the Ordo Astartes, which is actually a thing. It's an Ordo of the Inquisition that just looks at the Space Marines, and it only has like 10 to 30 Inquisitors in it. And he was like, well, they live on my ship. And I was like, yeah, there's nothing saying they don't, and there's only 30 of them, so why not? Like, that sounds like a cool idea. So it is far more rewarding to work within those limitations than it is to just blow your load and just say, well, you know. And by the way, I'm not saying don't write like this. You write however you want. And a good practice maybe for your first lore excursion to 40k is to maybe blow that load, is to go mental and do what you shouldn't do, just so you know what it looks like, you know. But in terms of having your ownership only means something if it means something to other people. If other people don't really respect the fact that you own something, then you don't own it. You know, you just don't. You don't have any legal recourse to it. If you write something that fits into 40k, and somebody asks you about your lore, you explain it, and their eyes light up. Dude, that's the most rewarding feeling in this hobby. Never mind your models, never mind your... If somebody asks you, oh, they're cool, and, you know, what's their lore? And you talk to them about it, and they go, wow, that's actually... that would make a good book, like an actual 40k book. You're like, oh, dude, that's... You know. So, it does matter, is what I'm saying. In terms of modeling, I'd quite like Maka to jump off on that, because his channel is basically all about that. It's all about ownership of your models and how to make them your own and things like that. So maybe Maka can talk to us about your dudes being, you know, the models you have on your table.
Well, the very first thing I like to say is that in both the game and in the models, I think of it as like we're playing in the sandbox that was created by someone else. And you can deviate from it, right? You can treat it like any other game. Like, if you're playing a ball sport, right? Let's say tennis. You can play tennis with a different ball, but is it still tennis? You know? Like, it's a bit philosophical in that way. And it's like, you can use this world, and if you can write something that fits into the world and feels like it belongs, awesome. It's when you try and make the world fit your vision that I draw my problems with it, okay? And that goes in like every sense of direction possible, you know? Especially when people start just trying to use it as a lazy analog for 20th and 21st century politics and identity politics, you know, where whether it's preferences or political ideologies, you know, left wing, right wing, doesn't matter, right? But it's trying to just that direct allegory that leaves a strong distaste in my mouth, because usually it doesn't fit that universe very well. People will say it does, and they'll come up with all sorts of excuses as to why, like, oh, but 40K's always been about politics. That's why, my space, I don't know, KGB is perfectly fine. And you'll be like, okay, cool story, But there are ways that you can create stories that fit into the universe. And it's easy to do. And the best building blocks for that are Games Workshop's existing short stories. Because I don't know about you guys, but there's been that many like little snippets, just single paragraphs or single lines even in codexes or White Dwarf magazines over the years that just give you the hint of something and you're like, I need to know more. Whether it's I did an Ultramarines Nemesis chapter. The Nemesis chapter was a destroyer company, and there's just a couple of paragraphs. That's it in a book, and it just says the Ultramarines destroyers are marines that use sort of the unsanctioned equipment. Like you use it and it give you cancer. Like it's a death sentence for marines to use this stuff, and it's just tolerated by the Emperor and the Primarchs because it gets the job done against like Xenos and that. And there's a group of Ultramarines in the Nemesis chapter who is a company that specialized in using this equipment. And they were kept on the outskirts of Kelth. They were kept away from everyone else because they're like, you're dirty and you'll contaminate us with all your radioactive weaponry. And so they were just like hanging out in the hills when the whole incident with the word bearers went down. And so while Kelth is getting just brassed up by the word bearers and the loyalists are being picked off left, right, and center, these guys realize, hang on a minute, nobody knows we're out here in the hills and we've got all our stuff intact. And then they started coming across just hordes of demons that were being summoned onto this planet. And they were like, oh, this is awesome. We're just here, have some rad grenades, and you have some phosphex. And, all this equipment was perfectly suited to fight. And that's it. That's all we know about them, is that just like they were out in the hills, fully armed to the teeth, weren't hit in that initial salvo, and then all of the word bearers that came down to Cal thinking that, oh yeah, it's free reign now, ran into them. And that was all I needed to go, you know what? I reckon I can make an army out of that. And so I did. And I think those sort of things, just like that one story, that one paragraph, like think Sides of the Emperor. It was a long time before we got much detail on Sides of the Emperor. It was just like, here is a chapter, it looks pretty cool. And they got in the way of a hive fleet and inflicted severe losses on them that pretty much crippled their chapter doing so. It's essentially what the fluff was for a long time. And yet people love Sides of the Emperor. And that's often how I think it goes, is taking something that's it's hinted at in the fluff and expanding on it. And Alan Bly, the late Alan Bly, said exactly that. He's like, his idea was if 40K gives you this big overarching view of the universe and the system, he goes, he would focus on just a single event in like the timeline and like Bad Ab Wars. And he'd just go, all right, let's dissect this one with a scalpel and look at what really went on in there, because there's not much said about it. So we can expand it. We can create something there where there was nothing before except just hints and, a few names of some characters. And then you get like the Carcharodons, you get Minotaurs, you get Clementers, like you get all this cool stuff, Astral Cores, the Tyrant's Legion, that it was just very, very thin on the ground. Just, Huron Blackheart was an Astral Cores Marine who went rogue and became the leader of the Red Corps. That was basically the backstory. There wasn't an awful lot on Bad Ab Wars. Now Bad Ab Wars is sort of one of those holy grails of old school 40K campaigns.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is like growing that universe, that world, and wanting at the end of the day to think to myself, if I showed my work to them, would they be proud of what I did with their vision? Not would they accept what I have done, twisting their vision to suit my story.
That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's literally it. That's literally it.
It's a litmus test, right?
If you're writing lore and you need to introduce a MacGuffin or something into 40K for your lore to work, you need to stop, rewind, rethink, go back to what made you introduce that MacGuffin, and cut it out. Like that's literally what you do. it's the one size fits all. It solves nearly all problems. It's really weird as this, panacea of writing lore for 40k. You write lore. Number one, you write it not verbatim. So you write it in universe and you write it mysteriously. So nobody really knows, but what we do know is this, right? That's how 40k lore is written. You don't say, my chapter does this, and this, and the culture is this, and this, and no. You literally write it from the best lore I've ever read from fans has always been in character from an Imperial citizen who's seen them fight. Like they watch this chapter fight. Now you can imagine how awe-inspiring that is. So they get to go, they have like a chainsaw coming out of their ass, and it's like, I've never seen this before. It's amazing. And it reads really, really, really cool. But whenever you can almost pinpoint when lore's going off the rails, and they start introducing, for instance, I saw one where this guy's Space Marines were all static blanks, and I was like, okay, well, it's not possible, right? That's not possible in the lore.
It was like, was it framed as a gene seed flaw, that kind of thing?
Yeah, they framed it. So what they did is quite clever. So they did. We are a second founding chapter who were fighting in the Horus Heresy, and we were fighting on Luna, right? Okay, cool. We were, I can't remember what legion he was, but he was on Luna. And I think he was a traitor legion who was loyalist. So they were kept on Luna away from everything because they didn't know where they were going to do, which is fine. That makes sense. Abaddon, though, crashes a ship into Luna in the Solar War. Mm-hmm. And he basically had his chapter down there fighting alongside the Sisters of Silence. And so many Sisters of Silence dying next to his mostly psychic dudes basically made them into psychic blanks. Don't ask me how. It just kind of worked in a 40k weird way. It was like, okay, I can imagine Games Workshop writing something like that. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the game, I had to say to him, this is really cool. And if you're a Games Workshop writer, this would work. Like this would probably pass. You probably, yeah, okay, yeah, we can introduce that. No big deal, right? But it's still an excuse to get what you want. A really good lore writer will do it without using the MacGuffin. And if it doesn't work, sometimes you have to abandon an idea and go, do you know what? This isn't working. This just doesn't work. Okay, like they can't be psychic blanks. Maybe one or two of them can be psychic blanks, and they always rise to prominence in the chapter because they're seen as being favored by the Emperor. That'd be cool. That'd be a mutation that you can do after the fact, But to have them all be like that, and psychic blanks are so rare and needed that your chapter would just be gutted by the Inquisition straight away and spirited away to be used in, fighting demons and stuff. So that's what he did. He rolled it back and said, okay, we won't do that. It's now just a gene seed flaw. That means that one Marine in every 1,000 or so is a psychic blank. That's fine. But that's what it is. Exactly what Maka said there. You want to be able to go to something like Alan Blythe. Obviously, we can't now, unfortunately. But writers like him of that ilk. Okay, yeah, that works. Psychic blanks being your entire chapter, he'd be like, what? No, that's not possible, right? Warp is used to create Space Marines. Controversial, but it's true, right? Mm-hmm. The gene seed uses the warp. So if you're a psychic blank, it won't take. You can be a psychic blank after you've got your gene seed, but then how? How do you become a psychic blank after you've gotten your gene seed? So yeah, that's just one example of where things can quickly go off the rails. I've seen tons of different things where people have had clever ideas in terms of the lore, but you need to understand that we don't work for Games Workshop, and as much as we may feel that Games Workshop get things wrong, they are still the custodians of what the hobby is in terms of what they wrote back in the day, right? If you really do value old school 40k, then work within its strictures. The actual new lore that's come out, I would say anything that's been written in the last 5 to 10 years, you can disregard if you want to. Unless it's something like Primaris Marines being a thing, But anything past that point, is considered in my head sacrosanct. That's 40k. Don't mess with that. The way the Inquisition works, the way that the Grey Knights work, the Custodians work, the Wraithbone, for God's sake, don't do new Wraithbone.
Yeah.
Don't do what Games Workshop are doing, right? Do what what 40k was. I'm sure we'll get into that later because, in fact, I'd like to get into it now.
Let's do it.
So I don't forget. Has there been, in terms of ownership of your lore and your models, what is the last bit of lore that came up where you went, do you know what? I'm retconning the shit out of that. I'm not using that. That's stupid. Because there is a real question here of ownership of, okay, if you don't like something, how far can you go in saying, okay, that doesn't exist in my headcanon for my dudes, like it doesn't exist for my models. Like, what was the last time you actually did that?
8th edition.
Are we talking Primaris?
Actually, just pre-Primaris. I'd say Wrath of Magnus stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's...
probably. So Wrath of Magnus into the Gathering Storm.
It's like an acid trip. That sequence.
It is literally like they sat there in the studio and did crack, and then sat around a table looking at the ceiling going, wow, and then my hands are huge, and then they went, anyway, 8th edition. Let's just have Ivrain go in there and give him a lap dance. That'd work.
It's the full convoluted nature of it. It's like you can take a bit of suspension of disbelief, right? But in order for the setting to work, it has to be grounded in a degree of realism, in that 40k is our future. That's the whole premise of the setting. It's like, yes, psychic powers exist. Yes, aliens exist. Yes, incredible technological advances exist. Cool. But apart from that, it plays by the same rules of physics as the universe that we all inhabit today. The problem is when they start doing things that go too far and break too many of the rules of the universe at once. And some people can rationalize it away by saying, yeah, well, it's a futuristic sci-fi universe with space magic, therefore anything's okay. The typical cope that some people can drop very easily.
That everything is canon argument pisses me off so fucking much.
Yeah.
No, it isn't.
Well,
literally, no, it isn't.
But I can't believe people actually say that. That's crazy. How can you just say everything is canon?
But the company does, because the company doesn't want to be responsible for when they break canon. It's just easier to go, you know what, there is no canon. There was canon, but all the people who wrote it and cared have since left the company. So now it's by happenstance fallen into the hands of other people. You could say lesser writers, but because it's fallen into the hands of other people, I don't think that they have any more ownership of it than I do at this point. And I know that might sound a bit egotistical, but it's like, well, I've been around it for longer than many of these writers have. Do I not have some degree of ownership? Like, they didn't create it. They're just employed to throw some ideas down on paper every now and then. Like, at what point does, their ownership, end and mine begin? It's like The People versus George Lucas, if anyone's ever seen that documentary.
Yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about. That's a great example.
But like when it comes to something like The Gathering Storm and why something like that, jumps the shark so much, I'm going to take up a bit of time here, but I'll try and truncate this heavily. It's like, so you have a group of people on Cadia while Abaddon is attacking the planet. And he can't, for some reason, with the might of all of the Chaos Legions and demons and Blackstone Fortresses, can't break Cadia. Which is amazing because if he, that's more force than Horus had attacking Terra. But anyway, and all he has to do is blow up Cadia. He doesn't want to conquer it. He doesn't need to claim the planet. He can just blow it up, right, to achieve his means to an end. So on this planet is Belisarius Call, who at this point we don't know much about. He's just examining the Cadian pylons. There is Ivrain of the Enid faction of the Eldar, who we don't really know much about that yet, but essentially they're trying to summon an Eldar god of the dead. Is it Voldus, I think, a Grey Knight with them. There's Inquisitor Greyfax, who's an Inquisitor, but she's been frozen in stasis. And who was it? One of the Necrons, Trazyn, wasn't it?
Yes.
Lets her out of the Pokeball, basically. Like, hey, I've had this one in stasis. You might be handy to you. Anyway, obviously, Cadia gets crunched because Abaddon, I guess he can't exterminatus the planet for some reason, so he just drops a Blackstone Fortress on it instead. Physically drops one into it. But the Eldar are like, that's okay. We can just flee through this conveniently located portal. So they flee into the Webway, Belisarius Cawl and the Eldar, this just ragtag group. And when they pop out randomly in Ultramar. And when they pop out randomly in Ultramar, it just so happens that the planet they're at, there's actually a unit of Ultramarines there to greet them. Just by sheer happenstance. So then they get on their ship, and then they take the cruiser to Macragge. But when they get to Macragge itself is under siege by different Chaos Space Marines, also sent by Abaddon. So his full force wasn't at Cadia. In fact, there's a whole bunch of his forces at Macragge. But anyway, they get through the Chaos blockade of the planet and through this void battle, and they successfully get down there. An Inquisition member, an Eldar, a Mechanicum character. It's all very weird, right? And then Belisarius Cawl is just like, actually, I've got this suit here that revives Guilliman. And the Eldar are actually, no, your suit doesn't revive Guilliman. Actually, my special Eldar powers do. And Tigris is like, yes, this is a good idea. And I think it's a heavily wounded Marnius Calgar is like, this is a terrible idea and I don't trust Xenos. And the Eldar are like, no. So, like, here's the plan, Ultramarines. All we need to do is sacrifice some people next to Guilliman. Immediately, the Ultramarines like draw their guns on them. But then at that moment, like the Kool-Aid Man, a Black Legion Thunderhawk crashes through the wall, and then Belisarius Cawl puts the suit on Guilliman, who's in stasis, this suit of armor, and then while these Black Legionnaires get gunned down by the Ultramarines and the Eldar and the Inquisition, that's the sacrifice of souls, which now brings Guilliman back to life inside the stasis. So now Guilliman comes back to life. That's like, I've not even gotten to like the second half of the story. That's the first half of the story. It's like, that's a fucking nightmare.
I lost count of the contrivances. Right? Yeah, it's a mess.
So at that point, and then so from there, Guilliman wakes up and he takes like a day or two to be like, oh my god, what's happening in Imperium? The Ultramarines are all cracking their pepper because this is the best thing ever. And then Guilliman is like, all right, we need to like, you know, figure out how to like beat back this chaos invasion that's just randomly happening in our sector. Then there's a plague, a Nurgle plague that's out and about, and it's affecting different planets. And he finds that if he goes to those planets, they get killed from the plague. But then more planets come down with the plague, and he's like, hang on a minute, I'm not getting anything done as I'm Primarch because I'm always going from planet to planet curing this plague, which is mysteriously healed by my presence. Well, this must just be a chaos ploy to hold me here, so I better get back to Terra. So that whole segment is pointless, but it's to show you character growth. So he then gets on his flagship, and then for some reason, because space is now linear, when you travel in the warp, you actually travel in straight lines. You don't just teleport through a wormhole and out the other side. They end up in the Maelstrom because of Tzeentchian shenanigans. They get captured by the by the Red Corsairs, not the Black Legion. The Red Corsairs somehow capture Guilliman and imprison Guilliman on a a Red Corsairs space station that's inside the Maelstrom. But then Cypher comes along and he breaks them out of prison. And then the Eldar are like, this is great. Guess what? We've got another Webway gate that we can use. So then they take that Webway gate and then they go to not Terra, because the Webway gate on Terra is underneath the Golden Palace in the throne room, right? Enclosed. So instead they go to the moon, which the moon now has a Webway gate. And they rock up in some random crater, but these were also Tzeentchian shenanigans because Magnus the Red and the Thousand Suns follow them through and onto this moon. Now, I don't know what Magnus's plan is from here. Is he going to like just jump really high until like he escapes the moon's gravity and just falls through the atmosphere to get to Earth? Like, it makes no sense. Like, he's got no spaceships. I guess he would just be trapped on the moon. But anyway, and then he decides he's going to fight. And him and Gilliman are very evenly matched, even though Magnus has psychic powers. Somehow, Gilliman is a match for Magnus's psychic blasts and telekinesis. Even though if I was Magnus, I would just pick Gilliman up with telekinesis and just hurl him at the sun. But that's just me. But then the Sisters of Silence and the Custodes show up on the moon. And then the Sisters of Silence, Belisaria's call, Gilliman, Cypher, the Custodes all work together to push the Thousand Suns back through the webway portal, and it is sealed behind them. And then Gilliman heads down to Terra. Cypher's thrown in prison, then randomly vanishes from prison. And then Gilliman turns around to call, and he's like, yep, let's assemble the Primaris Marines and go on crusade. And legions are back, baby! Forget everything that happened in ever. Now we're back to 20-man squads with bolt guns and 10-man plasma gun squads. And legions are back, but they're not called legions. And yeah, it's like, so for me personally, that is just one of the worst fucking things I've ever read in my life. Did I tell it well?
That was beautiful.
I think that this is the point where, you know, Maka as the writer of that lore is like being dragged out of the offices of King's Workshop. Just no, and then the legions are back, and then they close the door. Oh, yeah, I think you had a point.
At least one. You had at least one point in there.
I feel like if you've seen the death of Stalin, like after Stalin passes and they just take like all the house staff outside and just cap them in the forest. So I feel like that's what happened to the writer after that one.
It's one of those where I don't understand how many passes did that go through, and they went, okay, well this is what we're gonna do. You know,
this is the best we can do.
Yeah, this is the best we can do. I'm sorry, you know, we literally just sat down and come up with this, but I think it's going to work and it's going to be fine. This is the problem when, again, we'll get back to topic in a minute, so don't worry, but like, this is the problem. And Black Library writers don't. This is the issue. You know, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Black Library writers are these amazing people. No, but what I can say is they would probably do a better job of your lore. Like, lore should not be written by people who make models and rules for a living, right? They should become two separate entities. Keep them apart, because every single time we've seen every single time we've seen somebody from the studio writing in-depth lore, it's gone horribly wrong. They just... Even your aberrations and that, like your Alan Blythes and people like that, they are people who have been deeply ingrained in the lore since day one, and they happen to write a game as well, right? Rick Priestley, quite famously, hardly wrote any lore for 40k, right? He would write rules, and he would listen to the more creative people in the studio, and they'd go, oh, that's cool, I'll write a rule for that. You know, and he'll do a bit of background lore on it, but that's all he did. He'd do like a blurb background lore, and he'd move on to his next thing, because he was a busy guy, and he liked writing games rather than writing lore. And that's how they should keep it. Because this Gilliman coming back reads to me as somebody who doesn't know how to write. And I can't put any clearer than that.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who doesn't know how to write creatively. Throwing shit at a wall because he wants Primaris Space Marines to come out and be sold. That's how it reads to me. And it's, how do we do this really radical idea of a Primarch coming back? Dude, he's in stasis and you've told us he's healing. Just have him stand up.
It doesn't have to be as crazy, obviously. Like,
there's a million other devices already written to do that job. And it's like, but they invented another one, arguably the worst one.
Yeah,
it seems
you have the Pharos over there. Why don't you link the Pharos to the chambers and the Emperor heals him?
Yeah, easy. Yeah, that could work.
Right, you are now back. I couldn't get to you before. You're too far away because you've moved. Because a call goes in, he attaches the Pharos somehow, right through boys, you know, like communication.
Well, that's already more plausible than like the convoluted stream that Maka walked us through, right?
Or they just moved Gilliman, I don't know, but like they do a conduit for the Pharos. It literally links to the Golden Throne somehow, and the Emperor goes, right, you want our backs on? Bang, up you get, right? Done.
Yeah,
Or working mysterious ways, I don't know.
Just connect it to the Great Rift, ripping across the galaxy. The anomalies just mess up the avenues of the warp and the Imperium and the material, and Emperor can do whatever he wants to do. For sure. My only point is, I think the bar is so low. That's it.
I mean, you could literally do the Great Rift has happened, and in doing that, it means all warp entities are now much more powerful. I can reach you much more easily, including the Emperor.
Mm-hmm.
The Emperor reaches out and goes, Gilliman, you are now standing up. That's it. Done.
Yep.
You don't need to do anything else. Like literally, you've written a nice, elegant solution, and then gone, let's do Eldar hentai. Just why not?
Well, that's fans being degenerate, right? Yeah. But
you know what I mean.
But in those 2 or 3 alternative ways to revive Gilliman that you just laid out, what is not being accounted for? It's his stupid armor, right? So it's very clearly convoluted because they wanted to have him in some. Well, you know what? Maybe I'm just getting ahead of myself, because they could just say that's just some backup reserve armor or something he artificed after the fact, right? Why did it have to be some bizarro life support but not really system that Call invented?
Which he now doesn't need.
Yeah, it's really like turn the dial back on that one real quick.
Yeah, I mean, going back to ownership, like, this is why you need ownership. This is why.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you need solid lore. I've said this before about things like Divinity Original Sin, settings like that. Dude, if you don't take your setting seriously, why should I? Like, why my investment in your setting? You have talking skeletons. Okay, I'm out. Like you want to do like really in-depth themes of like heartbreak and loss and yeah. But there's a talking fucking skeleton over there. I don't care. You're setting for kids. I'm not doing this. Sorry, no. You know what I mean? Like, I need a firm purchase on your world and your setting. That's what lore should do. If your lore makes me scratch my head and go, wait, Gilliman's back? How? Well, there's this Eldar bitch, and she goes over there and just, you know, they have this suit of armor, and for 10,000 years, by the way, Cole's had these Space Marines in stasis. Me and Cole's been sitting around for 10,000 years while everything goes to shit. He's been sitting on this MacGuffin this entire time, and what's he been doing? Well, he's been in stasis for a while. Okay, how long's he been out of stasis? About 1,000 years. All right, so for 1,000 years, he's been walking around, just looking at everything going to shit, looking at look at the Lamenters, these poor guys, right? Just as one thing, and you tell us in the lore that the Lamenters aren't even special because it happens to nearly every chapter out there. They're all getting decimated, and he's sitting on these. What is it? 100,000 Primaris Marines? Is it something like that? Right?
I think it's more. I can't remember offhand anymore, but
several
it's a lot.
legions
worth
of Super Marines, right? And you just sit there and go, do you know what? Now's not the right time for Gilliman to come back. Now's not the right. There was a really funny joke in Dragon Age Inquisition, which I really wished whoever wrote this. I know they're probably not on the writing team for Dragon Age anymore because it's fucking woke and terrible.
Oh yeah.
But like, he did this really funny thing where there's an antiquarian character who's really, shall we say, he's immortal, but he's also really, shall we say, formative. He's like a Shakespeare guy, you know. But you're running the Inquisition, and he wants to come and like parlay with you. So he sends one of his men to come and parlay with you. And he sends a letter to you saying, at sunrise on the 3rd day, my messenger shall arrive. And the person at the gate says, yeah, we saw this guy arrive several days ago. He waited in a bush over there for the 3rd day, and we just haven't shot him yet. So if you don't mind coming out and talking to him, you know, that's funny. Like, you know, that's how you. That guy's been sitting around all that time waiting for the right moment to come up, and because his dad is told him to, right? And that's funny. But this is just. Why is Cole doing this? Why is Cole just sitting on his ship? He's got Primus there. He's got everything ready to go. And there are so many points in 40k that do that break your immersion, that break your ownership, because it's like, well, is there anything to own if your entire setting just falls apart the minute I touch it slightly? You know, anything bar from 8th edition, I think Maka chose that as a point to branch off from. That wasn't a flippant comment, right? I know people listening to this going, Maka doesn't like 8th edition. Who wasn't you? No, that wasn't a flippant comment. I like 8th edition as a game, and I like the Primaris Marines, right? I think they look cool, right? I'm in the minority, I know, but that's just who I am.
I don't think you're alone in that.
Okay, well, the law though, you know, even just it is literally like they picked the worst option in everything and said, let's do that. And I know we have a rep for hitting on Games Workshop and saying, you know, this is terrible and the world's falling down. But this is one of those, please don't do this as a little boy cried wolf situation. We are literally right here. Empirically, we are correct. The 8th edition law sucks ass. And in terms of ownership, this is a really strong point for saying, just do what you want. From 8th edition, just do what you want. Right? This is why I said, anything before that, anything 10 plus years ago, sacrosanct. Don't touch it. Because that was written by people who really care about the law most of the time. It was written, there were mistakes made, but most of the time, it's written by people who really have an ingrained understanding of what 40k is. Not you, Matt Ward. Everyone else, right?
I would like to add to that like the war from 10 years ago, from that, it was the reason why it was so sacrosanct was because it was very consistent. People like to say it's always retconned, and then they like to point to some obscure example in Rogue Trader. Marines in Rogue Trader weren't, space Marines like that were superhuman. They were just regular humans, and there was women, and blah, 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 blah. Cool. But since 2nd edition 40k, it's been really consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been the things that weren't very fleshed out, like Necrons, for example. They get fleshed out a lot in 3rd edition. And then they get Matt Warded in 5th edition, which is still to this day very 50-50 divisive, I think. Like, some people like that they're now space Egyptians with dynasties. Others hate that they're no longer soulless
Terminator death machines.
Terminator. Yeah. But on the whole, it was very, very consistent. It's like, all right, there's 18 legions. There were once 20. There were 2 Primarchs. Don't know what happened to those. And then there was a heresy. And then after the heresy, there was 9 legions that were still loyal. And then they broke up into the chapters, right? And Ferrus died at Isfahan. And it's very consistent from the early 90s, like sort of 93, 94-ish. And has a really clean run up until 2017 and into 2018 with the Gathering Storm and the Wrath of
Yeah,
Gods.
I was just gonna...
That's the point. That's the hard, when Games Workshop just decided, look, for whatever reason, we are no longer writing an awesome universe and lore. We are now, peeling the skin off this. This is the facade that we hang our game on.
Now you can confirm this for me, but do you suppose that is because, and I agree, but do you suppose that is because that up until that time, they weren't trying to change the setting or move the setting forward? Is that correct? Or am I off? Is my judgment askew on that?
I think that they...
Because that's what 8th edition marks to me. That's what stands out. It's like a real push to the setting, right?
North was in the company at the time when 8th edition dropped, so he would know better from a sales standpoint of view. But my understanding as an outsider,
I just mean lore.
Based off my vision, is that they had to move the lore to justify moving the goalposts with their physical miniatures,
right?
Because their sales were in decline. Is the reason why they needed to change up the physical miniatures and why Primaris happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the law was just an easy way to justify what had happened. Because in the past, if something happened in 40k, it was like, oh, there's a new vehicle for Marines. They found an STC.
Yeah.
And therefore we have it. And then it was all of a sudden just Belisarius Call, just he had this technology, and it just became a very easy, mannequin to hang your clothes on, as it were.
So hear me out on this, right?
That's what I think.
I think, like, I partially agree with what you're saying, but maybe this is something for us to consider in this conversation, right? Because I believe you could have the Primaris models as they look, with all their flaws and wins, right? As they could come out, and I don't think they need the lore that was given to them. I think it could have been a new STC, or you know what? It could be, maybe that's what Belisarius called it. Maybe he just made new weapons and templates and armor marks and all this kind of stuff. Right? And that's his big project, right? And then that's our excuse for, new models with better scale, right? And that is much more tasteful, I think we'd all agree, from a lore point of view, right? But I think the thing that really pushed Primaris the way they needed to for the sales point of view is really the rules. Like they really needed to say, these ones are better, your old ones are worse, right? These are they're old
they
and worse.
overplayed their hand.
Yeah,
they overplayed their hand, because Chaos Space Marines proves exactly that all you had to do is change the scale, or at least not even change. I think people get too caught up on the scale change. They're not really easier to paint, because you're talking like a millimeter, like the shoulder pads, the helmets, that's all the same size as it's always been. It's just the legs are like a smidgen longer, Yeah,
it's the proportions and head size mostly.
But because Primaris are a lot cleaner, like a 30k model as well, they don't have all the purity seals. And it wasn't until like 9th edition starter set that you started seeing a bit of that creeping back in, a bit of the Grimdark aspects starting to creep back in. If you look at like launch era Primaris, they are so flat, their armor, it's pretty much just the golden equivalent on the chest, right? And it just goes to show that, like, they could have just called it Mark 10, just Marines are moving to Mark 10 armor, and they're restructuring their forces based on Gilliman coming back. He's got a new doctor, and they're just restructuring their forces. They didn't have to invent new organs and gene seed and blah, which just undermines and undercuts the universe, which is it's the core philosophy of 40k, right? That the Imperium is a realm in decline. It is Byzantine, the Eastern Roman Empire, slowly collapsing in just from invasions happening on all of its borders, whether it's Persians, Huns, Mamelukes, whether it's Saracens, Turkic tribes, whatever, right? All these little nibbles being taken out of the periphery. And yes, they've got some technology, but they're in decline. They're losing technology. Every year a little bit more is lost. The traditional craftsmen go away. That's the story of the Imperium, and instead it runs counter to that, in that now they're a revived Imperium that is in a renaissance, inventing new technology, inventing new things. It undermines the whole crux of the story, which is that it's a hopeless future for everyone. And hopeless futures don't have a strong main antagonist who's got a brand new army, which is suddenly reclaims all this territory for the Imperium and has all this wonderful new technology. It's like those two concepts are counterintuitive. It can't be you have enough military force to do this and you're also a realm in decline. It's one or the other, pick one. Maybe that's just me.
No.
North, you're a writing guy.
But I think from the standpoint of where we were at the time, in terms of like selling, I know Mac touched on it before. It was pretty much told to us as a way of injecting new people into the hobby, because ironically, the thing that saved the company wasn't 8th edition. It was Horus Heresy. And Horus Heresy was an idea that corporate pushed back on for years before I even got to the company. So when I got to the company, I was told, Horus Heresy pretty much, Betrayal at Calth, and what's the other one? The Burning Prospero. They pretty much put the company back in the black because they needed something to sell. Horus Heresy books were already really popular. and out comes these two. You can now have your own legion, and it was a really clever thing that they did, where you could double up what was in the box, because we sell them as 2 separate legions, but they're basically the same model. So you got your entire army in a box, ready to go. That was genius, and it sold like hotcakes. So, they wanted to capitalize on that sea change, on that new thing. Okay, but this was a new thing that we did. Maybe now is the time to move 40k along. It had already been in the pipeline quite a while that they were thinking of doing it. But as far as I'm aware, Games Workshop's decisions, and again, I'm not part of the studio, but like the rumblings I was privy to, Games Workshop's decisions are usually thought out years in advance, and the framework is put in place. 8th edition's big lore changes happen pretty quickly. I mean, when they started seeing the numbers of Horus Heresy, that's pretty much when the 8th edition changes started to really ramp up. 7th edition was, in a way, peak 40k for some people, but it was also the stalest the game has ever been. It was really stale. The setting was getting to the point where it was not just memeable, it was eye-rollingly. It was like, okay, yeah, this is 40k, we know where this goes, right? The year is never going to change from 999 and 41. It's just where we are. That moving on, though, I still say this, and I don't think Macca's counterpointing this in what he was saying. Moving the setting on was the right thing to do. From a business standpoint, from a lore standpoint, from a respect to your audience and their intelligence standpoint, right thing to do. Their execution of it, though, was baffling in a way that I remember taking the White Dwarf with Gilliman on it, and we got that a few weeks early. So I took that to America with me on holiday, and I read it, and I was sitting there thinking, like, all the enthusiasm I had for 8th edition coming out, everything that was going on there, was sort of zapped out of me. Like, I was just done. I was like, okay, this is not right. This is not it. This ain't it, Chief. That kind of thing. And I just... The reason why it was to sell models, as Mike said, it was absolutely to sell models, but it was also, sorry, there was a meme just that Mac had just put in our chat, which is quite funny. It's knocked me off my stride a little bit.
My bad.
So yeah. No, it literally just. What was I saying? It was for sales. Let's put it that way. It was for sales, and it is literally a piece of law written by people who want to sell models. It's not a piece of law written by people who think, fuck, I love 40k. Let's write some law to really move the setting on a little bit. No, it's we need Primaris Marines. What's the most over-the-top 40k way we can bring back Primaris Marines and bring back Gilliman? But, as I've always said, less is more.
Mm-hmm.
Less is more.
You keep it simple, stupid, right?
Keep it simple. Why can't Gilliman just wake up? Why can't... Well, it'd be a bit of a coincidence, wouldn't it? But, like, there are no other coincidences in 40k. Do your entire settings built on coincidences. Just wake him up, for fuck's sake. So yeah, that's where that is. And I think 8th edition is a really good point to say, okay, your ownership of your models and your lore really ramps up at this point, because Games Workshop have shown they don't know how to do it any better. That's the core point I think we're trying to make in terms of lore. Is that that was the sea change point when you went, they don't actually know what the fuck they're doing. Like, they haven't got a clue. So I may as well make up my own shit. I may as well just...
Right, but you still, I think we'd all agree, you still want it to be tasteful relative to the previous standard that everyone was...
The previous standard, yes. If your lore breaks 8th edition onwards, nobody gives a shit. I'm being serious. Not even the biggest lore anorak would give a shit if your lore breaks what happened after 8th edition. Like, it's just, okay, whatever. Unless you're from the Indomitus Crusade, then it changes, because now you're fitting your, like, my own chapter as a challenge from the Indomitus Crusade, because I wanted to work around it to see if I could do it.
Same. Yeah, no, I was just thinking that when you were saying it.
Yeah.
Like...
So, but most chapters, if you're like, you're like second to Ultima Founding. If you're not Ultima Founding, you're ingrained in that old 40k tradition. So ignore it. You can ignore it. You can just go, okay, well, I'm not writing in this because it's nonsense. No.
And it's a more homogenous setting as well, because from that point on as well, essentially everyone, as who was it? Gabriel Seth said, everyone's just ultramarines beneath that armor, basically, because they're not they're a combination of all the gene seeds. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're not really the gene seeds of that particular chapter anymore, because of what Cole did to make the Primaris.
I don't think that's, if I recall correctly,
are a lot more generic. They're not.
I believe the issue was that in the early layout of how Primaris were presented, they were devoid of the gene seed flaws that made those, especially flawed chapters like the Blood Angels, like that had their identity tied into it, right? And then Gabriel Seth was kind of like the maybe the authors or the players' kind of mouthpiece, kind of representing that point of view where it's like, what are we then, right? I don't think it's mixed gene seed. I'm pretty positive that Primaris were presented with, everyone's gene seed is still theirs, but the flaws aren't there. And then...
Yeah, but I think the flaws aren't there because the chimeric gene seed was used. So they combine different chapters' gene seeds together. And that's what the organs are that they were given. So the organs are not...
Maybe I'm mistaken then.
Blood Angels glands. These are, you've got Blood Angels gene seeds still, like your progenoids are Blood Angels ones. But these new organs that Cole's created that are based on like custodes / chimeric genes, they're like all-rounder organs.
And that's what causes the flaws.
And that's why they bypass the flaws, because they're like the flaws break down your organs because of like some chapters.
Yeah, various flaws will affect various. Yeah.
But because this new one isn't technically theirs anymore, it's like a generic, like, we found a compatible kidney, but it's compatible on blood type. It's not compatible, in other ways. Like you're an AB, this is a B negative, like something like that, it works anyway, but it's not the same. I don't know. It's hard to describe because it's all a clusterfuck, right? That didn't need to happen. And the fact that like you can have this kind of a discussion where you're like, oh yeah, but like this is a little confusing. Like it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
Well, the fact GW reversed the direction on that is more to your point, right? Like
they had to change their mind because all of a sudden they realized, and again, it shows you how much consideration they have for their universe, is that they reversed all the flaws that created all of the uniqueness of their chapters. They said now Blood Angels don't have, Black Rage and Red Thirst, and Space Wolves don't get Wolfen, and it took away, and then they realized, hang on a minute, we sell kits for those. Whoops.
Yeah. It's super short-sighted. It screams like if Wentworth was saying, from the inklings he heard while he was with the company, that it was rushed because of the success. The launch of 8th edition and those lore changes were rushed because of the success and feedback of the Calth and Prospero boxes. I mean, that totally lines up with the conversation thus far, even like tracking over the convoluted arcs of Gathering Storm, right? It just feels rushed. Like, I don't think the goal was to come up with the most absurd way to get all of our payoffs. It was just, we need to get XYZ. Doesn't matter. First draft, let's go, right? Put it through spell check, right? It screams to me like that. Like how North says, like, there's a clear lack of like writing and storytelling. There's like no there's no artistry, there's no meat, if that makes sense. It's all just like gravy. You know what I'm talking about? If that makes sense. And that just, like, I can't help, me anyways, I can't help but read that as, oh, it's just been rushed. Right? And then I feel that way, like, to a lesser degree, because it's just a less convoluted series of plot points. But even with, like, Lion and Angron, right? It's just like, oh, we need to bring back the Lion. Let's not think about the most logical and simplest way to do this, right? We'll just get all the payoffs we want. We need him to be able to walk through forest and teleport. We need him to have a magical shield. How does he get the magical shield? Well, let's just, feels similar energy to me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, as I said, at the end of the day, you can really just make it the universe what you want at this point, because it's all just hot trash after 8th. Like the end of 7th, realistically.
Well,
Like, do whatever you want.
As someone who still engages with the system, I don't want to go that far. I still engage with the IP and the game.
I
right?
understand, and I'm with you on that one. Like I definitely am with you. But the problem is that there are two sides to this that are equally worth acknowledging. Is that number one, as I said before, working within the strictures is absolutely worth it. It makes your lore sing doing that. Working within the strictures of 40k lore to write your own lore, or to make your own models, make your own regiments, whatever, is akin to edge highlighting your models, right? It makes them pop. You could definitely just do your lore by spray painting your models, writing lore like that, and then adding a few colours here and there, sure. But the actual, what really makes people go, wow, that's really cool, is making it work in the lore. So I get what you're saying there, I get what you're saying. But on the flip side, since 8th edition, the lore has been treated with such borderline disdain by this company that I would understand if somebody said, listen, 8th edition, I'm not even going to touch it. I'm going to write lore until 999 M41. That's where my guys are going to be, But the where I would say I would draw the line is if you start changing 8th edition. I'm not saying change 8th edition and onwards. I'm saying just ignore it. Like, write your lore up until 999 M41. Ignore 8th edition if that's what you want to do. But if you're going to work with an 8th edition onwards, then acknowledge the lore for what it is. But also, what I would say is if you're writing lore past 8th edition, past into M42, you have a lot more leeway in your lore. It's a lot more Age of Sigmar. It's a lot more the hard and fast rules are kind of, there is a reason why the Necrons and Blood Angels teaming up was ridiculed so viciously by people in 7th edition and before, right? Because it just didn't work. That was 8th edition plus lore in 7th edition, and backwards times. That was the reception. People laughed at it and it was retconned.
Well, yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, I'm not. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. If that's how I came.
No. I'm just trying to frame the argument, frame the what people are saying. So that's what I reckon. Anyway, is I definitely think that 8th edition onwards, if you want more leeway in your lore, if you want more people to just hand wave away what you're saying and it's fine, then 8th edition is for you. If you want more strictures and rules and hard limits to work within, stick before M41 if you can do, even though the new setting's fun as well. Yeah,
well, that's. I think you would agree just from this conversation, North, but that feels like where most of the satisfaction comes from for the creatives out there, right? Like getting it to be received as tasteful. Like if you could describe, if someone overhears you explaining the lore for your custom guard regiment, and they just think, oh, that guy's just talking about this, probably some old codex lore, right? That's probably like the litmus test. Yeah, it's like where it would be mistaken as if it were some old reference material. And like personally, even though I've done that in the 8th edition space mostly, because I kind of, for myself, like, I lean towards trying to keep things current, because that's sort of just where things are. It's still satisfying, like just from that, having your criteria and meeting it, but I won't pretend there aren't glaring issues and lame things you have to roll your eyes to, be like, oh yes, yeah, that did happen.
Well, it's only in the eyes of the beholder, isn't it? You can definitely work with a 7th and before edition mindset in 8th edition plus lore. You can definitely do that, right? And there's nothing saying you can't. I do that myself, and I wrote the Emperor's Wolves lore as faithfully as I could. But what I did do is I took the parts of 8th edition that are actually there. So Indomitus Crusade, Guilliman, things like that. But I just don't explain them. I just go, yeah, those things happened, and moving on, right? Hand wave it, moving on. Because I don't like it. I don't like that part of the lore. I think it's kind of dumb. So I'm like, okay, you know, these guys were part of the Unnumbered Sons. Okay, I don't explain it any further. So yeah, they were. And now they're this, you know, and now they're protecting this area of space.
That's actually a great approach for any like aspiring, like, I don't want to say aspiring writers, but like, you know, hobbyists who are looking to flesh out their homebrew, or not homebrew, but their lore,
if you don't
right?
like 8th edition, and a lot of people don't, then there are parts that 8th edition absolutely work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Guilliman coming back works fine. Okay, cool. Indomitus Crusade, that's a cool idea. I like that idea. Unnumbered Sons, pretty silly, but has to happen because you are Primaris Marines, and that's what Primaris Marines are. You keep those 3 things, but you just don't explain them too much. You say, yeah, those happened, and now we're talking about my lore. It's fine. You don't need to engage with it any further. The problems come when you've got to drill down into those subjects, and once you get to doing that, then you've got to engage with the nonsense. Then you've got to engage with, well, Guilliman's got this suit of armor that, you know, he's got this Eldar waifu who's, you know, and it just doesn't. That's when it starts to break down. You don't have to engage with it. I mean, look at actual 40k lore when it's written well, and there are certain writers in the studio even now who are writing decent 40k lore. Whenever they talk about a new chapter, right? Say there's the Sons of the Phoenix or whatever. They don't really, that they mention the Unnumbered Sons, but then they move on very swiftly to their culture and where they're protecting and the conflicts they've been involved in the Indomitus Crusade and beyond. That's what you should do. Like do a Paul Heyman in ACW, right? He takes a wrestler, he ignores the negative, and he accentuates the positive. You know, if a wrestler can't talk, he doesn't put him on the fucking mic. He says, right, you're a big, brutish guy. All your matches are going to be 30 seconds long. You're going to smash him into oblivion. Then you're going to be walking in the back, and you're not going to say a single fucking word, because that's how we market you. That's what you do. You take 8th edition onwards, you ignore the negative, and you accentuate the positive. What's the positive? It's got a lot less... it's got strictures in place, but you can let your imagination run wild with what you want your chapter to do. The old powers of the Imperium are still powerful, but if you're an Imperium nihilist, you're pretty much doing what you want. There's hardly any Inquisition there. There's hardly anything going on.
Yeah, it's very Wild West.
Very Wild West. Yeah. So, you know, you ignore the negatives, you ignore Call, you ignore the Guilliman coming back and how he came back. You don't need to go into the weeds. Games Workshop did that, and they fucked it. you can ignore that and just do what you want. And that's what I suggest you do with 8th edition. If you want ownership of your lore, and you want it to actually make sense, that's a way you can do it. In terms of models, I mean, again, Maka said it before, you know, I would like, actually, I quite like Maka's and your take on this as well, because you do really good painting videos. At what point do you see, and Maka, I suspect I know where your hard line's going to be with Horus Heresy, but we'll see. Well, at what point do you see somebody's army and their ownership, quote unquote, of that army and think, that's too far? That's fucking lame. You shouldn't have done that in terms of painting and modeling and putting things together.
Do you want to go first, Maka, or?
Yeah, look, I'm open to a lot of ideas. The hard lines for me really are when you dramatically change things that are established in the setting. That's one of them. Another is introducing Primaris type Marines into that setting and using very flimsy pretenses to do so. I'm iffy on bringing back like 2nd and 11th Legions because, like, yeah, there's scope for it, but usually when people do it, it's really cringingly implemented. Usually something along the lines of, dare I say, Fem Marines is one of the ones I've seen, and I mean, if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna change the fluff up, don't just, you know, it's almost like I give a rule of thumb, and the rule of thumb would be, don't just make it your fanfic where it's like, my Primarch's the best, this Primarch and everyone loves him. It's just very cringeworthy, right?
Mhm.
Make it grounded, make it realistic, give them actual flaws that are indeed flaws, that grounds it in the setting. You know, don't make it so they're the best as ever. They're better at siegecraft than the Imperial Fists. They're more cool than the Blood Angels. You know, nobody, more aggressive than the Space Wolves. Nobody likes it when you do that sort of stuff.
You don't want to Mary
Just-
Sue your own dudes.
Well, that's
Right?
the trap, right?
Yeah.
It's like everyone wants their dude to be cool, but it's like, you know, in the Horus Heresy, everyone loses. That's kind of the point of the setting. Like, you get momentary wins, momentary relief, but otherwise, all victory is fleeting. Remember that when you create anything, and yeah, don't try and subvert the universe to reinterpret things and create allegory where there is none, because you'll just annoy the people around you. Because nobody is like, it's a hard and fast rule, right? People say, oh, it's everyone's hobby is equal. No, people can be obnoxious in everything in life. And if people come into the setting and, you know, there is no obligation for other people to like your stuff. If you're going to come out with all your crazy fan fluff and it's terrible, don't be surprised when people call it out as terrible. I hate to say it, but it is the way of the world. Like, you're not just entitled to having everyone praise your work.
Oh,
Sometimes,
most certainly. Yeah.
You need a little criticism to improve on things. There are things that are in the black books under Alan Bly's watch that are terrible, like Perturabo's decimation of the Iron Warriors is one of those ones where I'm like, oh, really? Or a lot of the stuff that happens in the later Horus Heresy novels with, like, Urda and Astarte and the Siege of Terra stuff, where it's like, oh, and, you know, all these other people are involved in the Primarchs project, and this is the mother of the Primarchs, and here's the Emperor's name, and blah, 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 blah,
Look,
blah.
I think it's very
Yeah.
important we got that, because it allowed the Siege of Terra series to have an extra whole part. Okay, it's good. We got more. Why are you complaining?
Yeah.
I kid,
So
obviously.
yeah, just
sarcasm.
stay away from those
Big
tropes.
sarcasm.
You've got an entire heresy to play with. You can slot your stuff in somewhere. There's so many interesting campaigns and tidbits there that are hinted at that you can fit right into. Help yourself with those.
Oh yeah, well said. I agree with a lot of what you said, and like, broadly speaking, on the your dudes angle, as it relates to hobby, I guess, to answer North's question, maybe. The creative in me wants to be like, you know what? No limits. Do whatever you want, right? Be as creative as you can be. However, I think that means, and kind of speaking to what Maka laid out, I think that means your stuff's open to be judged, right? Like, you have to be open to how it will be received. So that's kind of like my whole view on your dudes, for lore, for modeling, for painting, for collecting, whatever. It's just, you can do whatever you want, but it'll be judged accordingly, right? Based on how tasteful it is, and by that I mean, like, how well it fits. Does it feel like it complements the dish, right? The overall dish that is, the 40k IP, or Warhammer, 40k Horus Heresy IP. For paint, like, maybe it's a tangent, maybe not. You can tell me what you think, but this is like a weird kind of quirk or point I find myself arriving upon as it relates to hobbying with your dudes. I've and maybe this is just peak snobbery, I don't know, but everyone's sensibilities are different. Don't judge me too harshly, but when I look at named characters, right, and look, I see the appeal in people wanting to have their collections matching, right? You have an army and they have a color scheme and you want to make it all look uniform and cool on the tabletop, right? And I can 100% see the appeal in that from an aesthetics point of view or a collection point of view. But if you're playing like the Genesis chapter, which I think they're an Ultramarine successor, which is red, if I recall correctly, right? And that's the army you've built. And then Guilliman, you want to have Guilliman in your army? and I see he's in red, I can't help but question, why would Gilliman paint his armor red for you? Like, it's just crazy. Like, I don't know. And it's like minor. It's like a minor grievance, right? It's definitely like a weird quirk of mine compared to the things we've been discussing thus far, right? It's very minor.
I can see why it would annoy you.
But it's like from an in-world point of view, I'm imagining the novel, right, where Gilliman comes to the Genesis chapter. There's no fucking way Gilliman's coming in with red armor to match the successor chapter, right? The successor chapter would be honored beyond belief, right? Beyond anything, just to have Gilliman show up, right? If he painted his armor red, they'd like cry and not be able to fight or something. You know what I mean? They'd be too emotionally moved. I'm being sarcastic.
No, Genesis chapter.
You know what I mean?
Honor is mine.
Yeah, it's such
Bring the blood red paint.
Yeah, it becomes like,
you may keep the Emperor's sword in recognition of
Jesus
your work.
Christ. Yeah. Well, that's where that goes, right? It's like my suspension of disbelief is like, I can't, right? I don't know. Like, again, it's minor, but that's kind of like for me, like, that's kind of like in the tasteful kind of like equation, right? Like, if I saw an Elven, pick any Gilliman or Dark Angels now that their guys back, right? You know, if you're some Dark Angel successor chapter, like, I would think it's more tasteful, more appropriate, more believable if if he's fighting alongside your successor chapter, well, he's going to be looking like how he does, right? In his Legion colors, right?
I think it's pretty cool to show that difference. Like, I know some people have started doing Grey Knight Brotherhoods in different colours, and then when Drago turns up, he's silver, because of course he is, because he's been in the war. What's he going to do? They turn up, go, oh, you know, and take your colours? No. You know, like I like that. I like when people do that. They're like, okay, well, because you're sort of showing how different you are to your parent chapter. If one of the original dudes shows up and he's in your army, but he's in the original chapter's colors, that's cool.
Oh yeah, that's like that. Great point. Yeah, that's like a further flex, right?
Yeah. So and by the way, Gilliman just being there is enough of a nod to your chapter's importance, rather than him actually being in red.
Yeah.
Actually being like these guys are just fuck the Ultramarines. These guys got what it is.
Yeah.
These guys got what it takes. You know.
And like I said, from a aesthetics, painting, collecting point of view, I can appreciate like the uniformity, right? Because there's an appeal to that, right? And like, I like painting and having your guys look good, so I get it. But just from a your dudes and that point of view, where it's like, well, where does your dudes intersect with like tasteful integration, or however you want to term it, with the broader lore? I think there's a minor point to be made where it's like, if you're trying to maximize tastefulness, if that's the goal, I think there's a point to be made where it's like, maybe you don't want to paint your named characters to not match your offshoot scheme if that's what you're playing.
There are, yeah. I mean, there are. I think what we're saying is you can do your hobby however you want, right? I don't care, right? If you turn up with a gold Gilliman, I don't give a shit, right? These are toy soldiers.
Yeah. I wouldn't. It's not an issue, right? Like, I'm not gonna go over to the table and be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you painted it like this." No, not ever. I would never, right?
There are people who will do that, though. There are people who will stop your game and say, "Excuse me, you painted your Blood Angels wrong." It's like, I'm playing Blood Ravens. Like, you know, and you know, these chuckleheads will turn up. I've had it happen to me. You know, they will turn up. Oh, the Space Wolves aren't done right. It's like, not Space Wolves, they're Emperor's Wolves. And then you realise what you're saying. You're going, dude, I'm 37. Why am I justifying my lore to you in a public place? Fuck off. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not having this discussion with you. We both have better things to be doing with our time. He says as he's playing toy soldiers on a Saturday afternoon. But like,
it's true.
You know,
in that example,
you know,
there's one exception to that, just the one hard and fast. That is when people fetishize their tabletop miniatures. These are my subdom mummy milkers, furry adjacent you know, or anything that has to do with like corrupting youth, you know, like children. I'm very protective of kids, you know, in teaching and scouts and that kind of thing. And it's like, I don't want to see some weirdo coming in and, you know, sexualizing things. Like, look, we've got Slanesh, and hinting at it with Slanesh is enough for me, you know, or Dark Eldar. It's like, that's it. That's as far as I want to go down that rabbit hole, because it doesn't add to the setting to go further.
Well, it doesn't add to
bring it
the
to your
war
tabletop
game,
and you
right?
Exactly. And when people bring it to the tabletop and you can clearly see that they're getting a thrill out of your negative reaction to their fluff, that's like a hard cut off for me. Where it's like, no, you are not doing the right thing. Like, you are not doing this for like the good of the hobby. You're doing it because this is your kink.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a part of this.
Like a troll, kind of like a troll move sort of thing. Like,
yeah, I don't have to,
trying to get a reaction,
I don't have to,
right?
Yeah, like, I don't have to attack you necessarily for it, but I am not obligated to tolerate it either.
Yeah, well,
So,
I think
go find someone else to play a game with.
if there's like some serious lines being crossed in that regard with, like, on the topic of like kink and like, you know, like, you want to keep your hobby local gaming store wherever you're playing like available for the younger the youngsters, basically, right?
Well, I've shown pictures before of people who've done like Gilman conversions where they're just giving you a big set of bolt-on fakies, and they've just literally rolled like green stuff balls and just slapped them onto the front of his armor. It's like, no rational human being does that.
Yeah,
thinks,
that's troll.
This looks good,
100%.
and this is a good idea, right? So it's like, that is a pretty hard and fast cutoff for me personally, where it's like, that is behavior I will not tolerate. If you want to do that and do it in your own house and your own time, fine, go for it. I'm not going to tell you what you can't do with your models, but again, like, I do not have to put my models on the same table as you. So go enjoy your thing, find like-minded people, hang out with them. That's all.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page about that kind of stuff. 100%. Like, that's also another thing. Like, I don't like, so to me, the act of, like, you know, playing Warhammer is like, it's two separate people, right? Putting in a lot of effort, spending money, putting in a lot of effort to realize like there's some like legit labor that goes into making 2,000 points of army, right? Regardless of your game system, right? And those two people are doing that separately, and they're going to come together in kind of like a gentleman's agreement sort of way, where it's like, we're going to cooperate to do something pretty cool, right? And then we might have to do that for terrain too, right? That's a whole other amount of labor, right? But then the idea is people are collaborating to make something that just looks awesome, right? And then there's a cool narrative, as we discussed, and you get to live out the interaction of what you've created and what they've created, and that's the reward, right? In my kind of view of things. And yeah, I don't want to like soft canonize my Space Marine chapter against that, right? Like, in the case of what you just described, right? Like, I don't want to play against that, right? And I think that's also like a risk you run with, like, if your dudes is like an open playbook and people want to say like, oh, you can do whatever you want, right? Well, you run the risk of like, yeah, well, you can do whatever you want, but it doesn't mean I have to play that. I have to play, or, you know, play games against you or whatever. I'll play someone else, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's
agreeable enough, I think.
Nothing else to add.
Yeah.
It's like, that all sounds like absolutely reasonable.
I just don't see, like, tolerance has to extend both ways, right? Like, if you're not going to give me the courtesy of, you know, treating the law and that with the same respect as me that you want me to treat yours with, why should I? It's just, you know, like a bit of basic human psychology, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, the Gilliman with boobies is definitely, can be described that way. You're like, yeah, lack of respect for, like, for a 40k, for a modern 40k example, right? Like, doing like a troll move like that is certainly just trying to disrespect like figures and the setting for a reaction, right? And then at that point, it's like, well,
yeah,
what is your behavior?
I think that's why people are so like,
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, man.
All
yeah, I
good.
think that's why people are so against female space marines. It's not as if, they have no precedent in the law. Like, yes, that it would be completely ridiculous and disrespectful to old law to bring them in. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
but on what Kaith is saying there, just as a jumping off point, is there is only one main reason why female space marines would be a thing, and that's because you want a female space marine to sit on your face. That is literally one of the only reasons why these idiots, these degenerates, actually want them in the game is for that reason. Again,
Well, what would it actually add?
I don't entirely agree, but that's not to say I like female space marines. I think I dislike them as much as you do, probably. But I think there's.
Here's the
I just
question,
have-
though.
yeah.
Though,
What's up?
right? The question to that, Kaifer, is like, what does it add to the game? And if it doesn't actually add something, then it's kind of like, yeah.
Well,
If it's not adding, like, then you're doing it for.
Yeah.
Like, what are the reasons for doing
This is
it beyond I want to do it?
This is an interesting topic, and for the record, I'll just engage just to play it out and explore it. I'm not devil's advocate kind of thing. I'm not. I'm not for female space marines. Okay, let me just put that out there. What does it add? I don't know. What does my custom Salamander successor chapter add? Not anything really more. It just adds I guess damage, right? You have to make an exception. You have to come up with a MacGuffin. Well,
Adding
exactly.
chapters is fine because that's an established trope of the universe that you have more chapters.
Yeah.
But what would improve in the universe if you made a female chapter? What suddenly gets more interesting about the universe?
Honestly, I think probably nothing. I think things get less interesting, right? My sensibilities around the whole subject matter is that what makes Space Marines interesting is that there are no females. That it's one of their unique thematic, points. You could say ID markers, right? And to add females to them, or make a chapter that's just all female because of some weird gene seed flaw or something weird like that. It just makes them more like other armies, right? I think it makes them less unique, right? It's man, Space Marines are. Brotherhood is a key theme in Space Marine identity, right? So from that point of view, it's I just think, to answer your question, Mac, I think female spacemen just damage the broader lore. If you're doing some weird gene seed flaw thing because some guy is weird and wants to do that, it's fine, but it's like I said, concepts and projects and executions will be judged accordingly, right, by the local player base, right? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Maka, does it? Not really.
Oh, not really.
What does it add?
I think it's sort of just tangential. Yeah, because it's nothing's really being added there, is it?
No, I don't think. I think it only subtracts, personally, right? I think if you want your all-female power armor army, we all know what you're supposed to do. The Sisters of Battle.
Collect Sisters of Battle, yeah.
Right, which are fucking cool as shit. They're awesome.
Yeah, and I think so. My point on the female Space Marines and the ownership thing is that this is what I mean when I say there is a limit to what you can do and remain in good graces of the community.
Yeah.
The female Space Marines would not be added to the setting for the right reasons. They'd be added for inclusivity, diversity.
Yeah, I think
that's literally it.
I think when the Custodes controversy came around, I termed it it's almost like a virtue signal, social social justice points or something like this. You want brownie points, right?
There was ways to do it, man. There were ways to do female custodies. If you really want to do female custodies, just say, listen, I said it before, just say, all right, Space Marines are mass-produced because they needed to be back in the day because the Emperor wanted to do the Great Crusade really, really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So we only use the male genome. We don't know how to reverse engineer that. So because we need Space Marines so quickly, all Space Marines are male and will always be male because we don't have to do it any other way. Right? Cool. That's one thing out the way. But because of that, every single Custodes is handcrafted by the Emperor, and we retcon it so we can't make any new ones. They're so precious. There's 10,000 of them, and the number's always dropping. But because they're all handcrafted, they can be female. Done.
Mm-hmm.
You now have your female Custodes, and it's cool. It's fine. And I think a lot of people are still saying, I still wouldn't like it. No, dude. Let's be honest. If you like the lore and they actually put thought into it and didn't just say, no, they've always been there. Like, you'd be like, oh.
So counterpoint for your consideration, right? This is just kind of my thoughts at the time. I still think that the Talons of the Emperor theme gets damaged by having female Custodes. I think there's something uniquely wholesome about Talons of the Emperor, where these like two separate, like gender isolated semi-subfactions between the Sister Silence and Custodes are better than the sum of their parts. And that's like something uniquely them that they can do, right? And I think that gets damaged by having female Custodes, right? And it's like a minor point, right? Like that was my best case like defense from a lore point of view.
No, you convinced me. No, I'm with you on that one. Yeah, I get that. I didn't really take the Sisters of Silence into consideration there, but I think that's a symptom of what Games Workshop have done with
Yes, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So,
100%.
you know, if they said, listen, okay, we're not doing female Custodes, but we're going to make the Sisters of Silence far more badass and in your face, I'd collect that shit.
Oh, dude, it'd be amazing. They consistently ruin... They don't know how to handle Talons of the Emperor, at least in 40k.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah, well, again, it should be they are a very scarce force rather than being, you know, now they're everywhere, they can be anywhere they want. But back to the original point is that, you know, the female Custodes thing is just another example of, listen, you don't like 40k lore, all right, well, if you want ownership of it, then just ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Just ignore it. You just say, you know what, that doesn't exist. You don't have to explicitly say at the start of your Scratch Codex, female Custodes don't exist. Anyway, onto my Orcs Codex. You don't need to do that, right? All you need to do is just not talk about it.
Yeah.
And if Custodes turn up in your lore, make them all male. Don't mention a female one. Just ignore it. Like, if you want ownership, there are ways to do it without being salty about it. I said in a video back in the day, it doesn't fucking matter what Games Workshop do, because since 8th edition, they've been jizzing against the wall anyway. They just come in their own hands, throw it at the desk and go, that's it, there's your law. Awesome, moving on, right? And you're just like, no, like, why should you respect what they do? Why are you upset that Games Workshop are doing female Custodes when nothing they do past 8th edition has made fucking sense from minute one? So why are we surprised? And this is what I mean. They didn't bring female Custodes in because it'd be cool for lore. They did it for inclusivity, diversity reasons, and if they bring in Space Marines, it'll be for those two reasons and for the degenerates out there. So let's be honest, most of the people who want inclusivity and diversity shoved into anything are mostly degenerates. These are people who want to fetishize everything all of the time and want to make everything sexual, even though little Timmy's standing next to them with his orc army with his dad.
You think so? I mean, maybe I'm just naive.
Yeah.
Because I was pushing back against Macus like earlier, similarly, right? It's like, you think is that the case? Really? Maybe I'm just not.
Dude,
maybe I'm a naive individual.
You work in those stores, man. They are rodents. They are human rodents.
I kind of
come in. And man, now it's horrible. Like they come in and they're literally sitting there doing like you know best orgy comparisons between which Primarchs would be the best and this and that and shit.
Yeah, that's.
You've got to go over there and say, listen, guys, do you mind shutting the fuck up and like not talking like that? Like it's just ridiculous, and they make your job so much harder. These cretins.
Yeah, that's incredibly that's without a doubt like degenerate behavior. But I would just kind of like. My assumption, again, I could be just naive, but I kind of figured like those people who want female Custodes want it for the same reason GW wants it, because they want that virtue signal points. They want those, look how virtuous I am. I'm for inclusivity. I'm for I'm sure there's both,
It's
right?
a spectrum.
Yeah.
It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum.
Like there's
yeah.
both.
And
Like,
it is definitely. I'm not saying everybody who wants female Space Marines is like that. What I'm saying is that a lot of the people who identify with those, I need this, or I need inclusivity, I need female custodians and female Space Marines, or I won't feel represented. Dude, you're a man. Like, what?
Sorry.
The people who are like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I need orcs, right? Because I too am a 8 foot tall, hunched over green fungoid who, you know, like, it's escapism. I don't need perfect representation.
100%
Like,
agree.
7 foot tall and in blue armor, no. Then shut the fuck up then and just enjoy the set. Like settings need rules, and the minute you start backtracking on them and saying they don't need to exist for modern political reasons, you're failing. And in terms of the degeneracy of it, again, Kaifer makes a good point, and I'll ride back on that a little bit. Not all of them are degenerates, but what I will say, most of the degenerates in this hobby who talk shit like that tend to be the ones who want more diversity and inclusivity, like female Space Marines and female custodians. I will say that.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I
think that's safe to say. Like that's where the overlap will be.
More with that brush because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to
we don't have degenerates on the other side of the aisle, but we do. I'm not saying we don't have degenerates on the other side of the aisle. We absolutely do, right? Anybody who's been on Major Kills Discord or wherever can see that the amount of fucked up hentai that the so-called based people have on their things, right? You know, so it is out there. Sorry for getting you.
No, it's like another one of these things you've enlightened me on, and now I'm thinking like maybe I am just like naive about like the 40k space, like socially and the different YouTubers and stuff.
You're normal. I'm gonna test this out. Hang on. Let's see if this works. Like, you ready? You're normal, Kaifer. You are normal.
That did work. That was impressive.
Ah, there we go.
You have a switchboard for that? That's cool.
No, it's mic, man. It's got all these buttons on here.
That's sweet.
I've been looking for the blowjob button, but I can't find it. Anyway.
Keep looking.
Yeah. I wonder what the hole was for. So yeah, no, I definitely do.
Wait till he finds out he has to give, not receive. Sorry.
My video on Monday, you could easily be forgiven for thinking I was deep throating this fucking thing. It was all in the face. Anyway.
Now who's fetishizing things?
Well, yeah, no, it is what it is. Phallic symbol.
The slippery slope.
Yes, that's what she said. So, like, in terms of, you know, ironically, degeneracy, it does seem to be more one-sided than the other, but again, we're not saying it doesn't happen across the board, because it does. 40k attracts broken-ass people, and you're all wonderful, you know, but it does. It just attracts broken-ass people. I called it cripples and bastards and broken things. That's what it attracts. And, you know, I always say the amount of hobby nightmares we get from store owners, people go, well, it can't happen all the time to store owners. It fucking does, dude, because they are getting a vertical slice of the hobby. Everybody in your local area who does Warhammer, they will see.
Fair point.
This shop manager will see. So he will see the degenerates. He will be making these opinions going, fuck, dude, these guys are weird. You know, and they walk among us, man. They walk among us. They do. And they come in and they have their Ivrain t-shirts on, and she's showing off her feet, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, what kind of a grown man walks out of his apartment or his mother's basement with a Ivrain feet t-shirt?
Yeah, it's a certain type.
In my local shop.
No, now that you've said it, there is a repressed memory, clearly, that's been triggered. Yes.
Oh, go on.
No, what you're saying lines up. Yeah, there are these types of people who will be blatantly presenting their degeneracy as if it is something to be, like,
yes,
witnessed. Who wants to see this?
Something to be proud of. You know, like ownership of the law. All right, I'm with you. Okay, whatever.
Yeah, just be a normal nerd and get a corn t-shirt or whatever, like you know.
Or have the folder on your desktop where you just have a little cheeky, you know, shake the hand of your best friend every now and again over your little, you know, feet pics, whatever, man. But, like, do you need the t-shirt? Like, do you need to go to the store where there are kids? and talk to me about how hot Fulgrim is, or how
yeah, that's
no,
that's a
no,
line. Oh, yeah,
go away.
it's bad for society. You can't.
Go away. Again, I know there's rule. What is it? Rule 32. Okay, fine, whatever. If it exists, there's porn of it. All right, fine. I think the more we lean into, you can do what you want with this setting, the more you give those people ammunition. Say, well, if I can do what I want, and they start unzipping their flies, it's like, no, we didn't mean that. We mean I just want more cool Space Marine law. Stop getting your penis out.
Fair
why,
point,
why are you
right?
getting your penis out?
No, I'm kind of just running the analysis back on what I said earlier, because that is kind of how I presented my worldview, right? Where I was like, well,
you are right. You're correct.
I want to keep things open for creativity, but I also am blatant. I think it should be judged accordingly. I don't think that means free pass, do whatever you want, and then everybody's welcome no matter what freaky creation you make. Not at all. I just I don't know where you guys lean on this, but it's kind of related to the topic, the Your Dudes topic, where it's what about things that aren't okay? So here, I kind of have more fun than most, perhaps, of taking concepts from other media and trying to see if I can get it into 40k. Mostly just because it's something I already like. For instance, I made a kill team of orcs that are all themed after kind of Metal Gear, right? And
Okay, cool.
and they're all kind of in sneaking suits, and some of them I painted their arms what would be just bare arms. I kind of painted in it's sleeved up, it's a sneaking suit, whatever.
I think orcs ideally lend themselves though to that kind of
stuff.
Yeah, because obviously with the orcs,
they are silly. Yeah, there's a built-in absurdity, and that's why they were a good fit for Metal Gear, in my opinion. For Metal Gear reference, I meant. But yeah, that's certainly a door I want to leave open as it relates to Your Dudes. That's why I'm kind of pro creativity and in that sense, right? Because I don't want to shut that down, even if it's not tasteful. If it's just someone's having fun, but it's not exactly tasteful or fitting, I kind of I'm not offended by that. It's just someone having fun painting their dudes weird or converting weird stuff, right? It's not offensive, but it doesn't exactly. It may not fit in a way where I'm oh, that's straight out of Black Library. So, and I don't know if you guys feel otherwise about that kind of line, so to speak, but I don't know. It's an interesting topic to me, this one, because it kind of props up it every now and again, and I guess the various facets of this conversation kind of speak to that.
No, yeah, I'm with you. I get what you're saying, and even what you were saying before. Ownership is important, and not everybody who wants these things in the hobby, inclusivity and all that, not all of them are, shall we say, bad actors. But if the vast majority of you are, then you can't really be surprised by when there's pushback on things like that, and it's okay, well, what are your motivations for doing this? So we are going off onto the other side of extreme views. Ownership is one thing, but this is where gatekeeping comes in, and I've always said this: if you're not coming into the hobby for the same reasons the hobby exists, then you probably shouldn't be here. And I know Games Workshop tried to gatekeep people back in 2020 when they were releasing all of these virtue signaling. You're not welcome.
Warhammer's for everybody. That lame.
All that
stuff.
shit. Yeah. So they've tried it themselves, but it doesn't work when the company itself does it. The company itself needs to stay quiet and release its products. We will handle the gatekeeping and say, look, do you like Grim Darkness in the far future? Do you like bolt guns? Do you like purity seals? Do you like Eldar? Cool, you're welcome here, man. No problem. Great. Buy your models, have fun. Do you like Space Marines? Only when they're female as well. then fuck off and go elsewhere, because that's not what
That's not this.
That's the kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's not the same. You're not coming in here with the shall we say, the right intentions.
No, I agree. It's like if you're coming in, why would you come into a hobby and then like want to change it? It doesn't make any sense, right? Like you should.
Yeah, exactly.
That should be your tell. That maybe there's a game system or hobby where it's more conducive to your sensibilities.
I'm going to be honest. As somebody, I know Mako can weigh in on this too. As somebody who's in the hobby in the 90s too, we didn't have any of these fucking problems back then. You didn't have any of these feet people coming into the store being like.
People were more decent.
What's wrong with you? I'm sure they were around, but they kept it at home. Like they were like, okay,
it was full of punks and goths in the 90s.
Yeah, goths and metalheads.
Dudes who looked like they listened to Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam. That was or Metallica and like the metal crowd. That was who you had in the 90s. Yeah. Then
Even
sometime in the 2000s, I think it changed to more of a like the social oddballs started coming in. It's hard to describe, but people who clearly had some social disorders of some kind. Can't narrow it down any more than that because it's too vague. Too vague terminology, right? Because it's a group of people who don't follow the social norms or can't read social cues. It could be autism, could be something else, right? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But because the community was a nice community and was accepting and opened their arms, unfortunately they welcomed it in. Then once it was in, and once we said anything goes, then stomping things out is what happens in a normal social, like in the normal world, right? If someone has bad behavior, it gets stomped out very quickly. But in an effort to try and make our hobby more mainstream, we became overly accepting, I think. It's philosophical and maybe a discussion for another time. But when you accept everything because everyone has their own right to an opinion and blah, 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 it is a very slippery slope where you end up with degeneracy and all sorts of other issues that stem from it. And when people then take that a step further and they bring that into their game, that's when they take their guys, to get back to the point, too far.
Well put.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps that's a good note to end on. We have been here for about nearing up on 2 hours now.
Hey.
Well, this was a very enjoyable chat, guys.
You too, man.
Anything you guys want to, I guess, plug or mention that's coming down the pipe channel-wise?
No. Quarantine Hobby Nightmares. If you like Little Wars TV, I'll be on that channel soon in a video. So we're going to be discussing War Master, the old Games Workshop game that was no longer really brought out and things.
Oh, neat.
And in terms of my own channel, no, just carrying on 40k rants, Hobby Nightmares, 5 times a week. So head on over there if you want to see any of that stuff, and that's where I'll be.
Sweet. Maka? Any final words? Final remarks?
No, my channel's been very quiet lately just because I haven't been doing a lot with the heresy lately, and I don't want to just create content for the sake of, negativity and all that. I get enough flack for that already. And to be frank, I've been just so flat out with work, which is an actual priority. But I am about to talk about Imperial Armor 13, the Lost and the Damned, or War Machines of the Lost and the Damned, I should say, to give it its full title. And that episode is primarily about, as the last Imperial Armor, what that meant for those who received it and what it was like in the balance of the game system at that time, because I actually wrote down a list, like a certain jolly fat man who visits every Christmas. But we're not talking about Uncle Kevin right now. It's actually a list of all of the units that the Marine Loyalists had at the end of 7th edition versus Chaos. And oh boy, if it wasn't for that book, I think the Marines is like 7 straight pages of units, and Chaos is like 3. So yeah, there's a reason that book was beloved for all of 5 minutes that it was there. So I intend to talk at length and ramble on about that for a bit.
That sounds like a good one. I'll definitely tune in. Alrighty, well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you made it to the end, you guys are the real hobby heroes. And oh yeah, again, Maka and North's channel links are in the description. All right. Uh-oh, looks like we're gonna have an awkward